Today on the Rise of the Challenge podcast.
Kind of glossing over a lot of details here, but my wife had severe postpartum. I was completely blindsided by that whole experience. And I wasn't a very good husband at all during this time. That's like one of my biggest regrets is looking back at that period. I'm like, man, my wife really needed me. And I was just like this angry, pissed off person acting like she did it to me. She needed her husband and I wasn't that guy. And that like really pains me to say, but that definitely influenced my decision to get out.
Welcome to the Rise of the Challenge podcast. Joining today, he's a military veteran, podcast host, and founder of the Elite Sentinel Coaching. It's George Hayworth. How you doing today, George?
Dude, I am great. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Excited to get going.
We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we'd like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what did you like doing growing up?
Okay, yeah. So, very beginning, I was actually born in Vienna, Austria. But when I was about 3, my parents decided to move back to America and raise me and at the time my younger brother in America. So, grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, outside of Portland, Oregon, in the suburbs. Pretty typical 90s kid lifestyle, rode bikes outside all day. Um, it wasn't the X Games yet. It was called something else earlier. It was still kind of in its inception, and they came on tour when I was like maybe 7 or 6 and did this big, skate park, built it and did the big show, and all the big names are there, Tony Hawk and all those guys. So my brother and I were always outside doing, skateboarding, inline skating, biking, all that kind of stuff. And honestly, my early childhood was pretty awesome. I look back on that time and I don't really have any like negative memories from it. I kind of lived the 90s kid dream of you play outside till the sun is going down and then you got to get home for dinner, right? So it was pretty awesome. I really enjoyed that period of my life, but moving to the challenge piece of things, getting into my teenage years is when the trouble started to kick in.
You talked about those extreme sports, and I think a lot of kids, it's those inline skating, it's the biking and all those. And I'll even add one for me was those razor scooters that came out.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
With those, that did you kind of feel like a daredevil or extreme in a way? Because those kind of items, I mean, everyone wants to do like the jumps on those inline
Yeah.
or skateboards. Did you kind of have that thrill when you were doing those outside?
Yeah, a little. I mean, I was a little bit of a daredevil. I mean, I wasn't like exceptional in any of that kind of stuff. It was just like all the kids did it. We were all doing it together. My dad built us ramps and stuff, and we were always jumping them. And yeah, we'd bang ourselves up every now and then. But no, I mean, I did snowboarding, but I did all the traditional sports too, baseball, basketball, all that kind of stuff. So I was just, I loved moving. I loved being active. I couldn't really sit still. And, me and my brother were just constantly on the move doing that kind of stuff.
You just talked about the teenage years started the change in your
Hmm.
life. Talk about leading up to that and talk about that part of your story.
Yeah, so a little bit of it was like I wasn't a very big kid, right? So all the other guys are starting to like hit puberty and grow beards and all that kind of stuff, and I was still very much like a little boy. I didn't like you didn't look at me and go, "Oh, that's a, real man child right there." I was the exact opposite of that spectrum. So I had a lot of insecurity already in that period of my life. But where it really came is my parents' marriage, right? My household was extremely intense growing up. Failure was punished very severely. There was like, if you didn't succeed, even if it was like almost a success, it was failure, right? There was like, everything is black and white. We walked on eggshells all the time. My parents were arguing all the time. Um, and just a lot of really negative, dysfunctional ways of interacting right now as an adult who's done a lot of work to kind of unpack how broken things were. I can see it night and day, but in the time, you think it's normal because it's how you're raised, that's your family. Um, but so like I started driving people away from me too. Like it was hard to be friends with me because I was being this type of person to everyone else. And most people don't want to deal with that type of person because it's not healthy. It's not normal. I was always competitive, like too extremely competitive. And I think that was a result of kind of the way I was raised. But my teenage years, specifically like 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade is when I really started noticing like my parents aren't doing so good, the way they talk to each other, treat each other, look at each other, all that kind of stuff was just very tense. Like you could cut it with a knife. And that obviously spilled over to us kids. And so combine the fact that like physically I hadn't really matured very much yet, and then all the uncertainty at home and the intensity and the arguing and things being thrown and whatnot. Yeah, I was full of self-doubt and like trying to find my place in the world. And um, I kind of went about everything in the wrong way because I was looking for validation from everyone, right? Um, and so just to make a very long story short, my parents separated for a time to try and work on things, and then my dad moved back in, and that was very short lived. And then they ended up getting divorced. I think they actually finalized the divorce the week that I turned 16. I can't remember the specific date, but it was like almost exactly my birthday. And yeah, that really like was kind of the final straw, right? Like it really crushed me. Um, because the way I was raised too, a Christian household, we go to church, all that kind of stuff. Like, divorce isn't something that's supposed to happen. And then here we are. And so it kind of like really shattered my worldview about things. And, just swirl all that natural teenage insecurity and trying to figure things out and then couple that on top of it. It was a very problematic time for me. But the final point I'll make with all that is it was the emotional stuff, right? Like the way, and I say all this understanding that my parents are broken people. I'm not mad at either one of them. I actually you've forgiven them and worked through a lot of that myself to not hold any resentment towards what has happened. Um, but my mom was very emotionally manipulative, like to the max degree. And so my understanding of like healthy boundaries and what should or shouldn't be tolerated, especially when it comes to relationships, was completely distorted. And so that really set me up for failure moving into, being a young man and dating and all that kind of stuff.
With high school, it's usually that time where you're trying to figure out what's going to be next in your life. And you mentioned
Hmm.
how you had all these parts in your life that were not going the traditional way that a high
Yeah.
school would think. Do you think that you might have would have been on going the downward spiral and not being able to have those friendships, or people were having a hard time really connecting with you, they couldn't be there to support? Or did you have someone that you could talk to about these things, or you kind of were just holding it in because there wasn't anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I had good friends and like, we hung out all the time. And so that was kind of my that was where I like got my reprieve from everything, right? Was I would, I turned 16, I've got a driver's license now. Like I would go and hang out with all my other high school friends to try and escape the situations. And I had tons of anger towards my parents. Like I said, a lot of emotional manipulation. I directed a lot of that at my dad. I blame my dad for everything. In reality, it was like at most half his fault. Probably not. Probably a lot less than that. Um, but yeah, so I was just a very bitter, angry, teenager. And so like emotionally, I kind of got stuck there too. Um, I didn't really like struggle. I had a good group of friends. I wasn't trying to be like the most popular kid at school or that kind of nonsense. I kind of like went to my group of friends and stayed with them. And we kind of did everything together. And that was like my way of kind of getting away from it. Um, I'd go into my own little world, so to speak. I still kept doing sports and, still worked really hard in school. Um, and 9/11 happened when I was in seventh grade. So I had always kind of felt the call to serve. And so during this time too, especially high school age, I was like, I think I want to be in the military. And so I started looking into all the different options there. Um, and I decided I wanted to be in the Army. And so I pursued like the scholarship route to go to ROTC and I honestly didn't know what that meant really compared to like enlisting, but that's what I decided for myself. And I'm a pretty when I commit to something, I'm like all in on it. So yeah, that ended up being the direction I started taking my life. But in hindsight, in retrospect, I think a lot of my motivation was I was searching for that validation as a man, right? To prove how tough I am. Look, I'm a big, strong soldier. I can lead men into battle, all that kind of stuff, right? I was hungry for that kind of approval. I think a natural, a healthy young man has some level of that desire. Like you want to make your mark on the world and arrive, so to speak, earn your mark as a man. But I had like an unhealthy level of desire for that, right? It was like, oh, if I do this, then I'll be a man and everything in my life will be fixed, right? It was a very naive way of looking at things. But um, the final point I'll make kind of about this period of my life was all the interactions with my mother, that emotional manipulation, I'm hesitant to say the term because it loves to get censored on all the different platforms. Um, but it's a very severe form of crossing boundaries where, especially in cases of like divorce, where one parent is oversharing information, especially like intimate details that the children have no business ever knowing,
Mhm.
with a child and treating the child as their emotional kind of uh, release, right? So the child is now there for the parent instead of the parent being there for the child, and it creates a very twisted dynamic. It's almost kind of like an Oedipus complex type thing there. That really messed me up. So couple everything we've talked about, and then I had that happening to me, and then I joined the army, well, sort of ROTC. Um, I was not in a very internally healthy place, right? I was very much looking for outward validation everywhere and doing everything I could to try and get it.
With ROTC, you talked about validation was a huge part. Talk about what was that experience like the first few months getting into it? Was it kind of going in the direction you thought it was going to go, or was it a completely different course?
No, it was very different, and every recruiter who listens to this is going to laugh very hard. They talk to you about what it's going to be like, and oh, you can, you'll be an army officer, and you can do all these things, and they show you videos of like airborne rangers jumping out of planes and stuff, and kicking indoors. You're like, yeah, I'm going to do that. You don't do that. You go to school. You're
No.
like barely in the army for 4 years. You get to do a few cool things, but like hardly ever. So I was really disappointed because I wanted to like get into it and start blowing stuff up and killing bad guys, right? Well, no, you're going to school. Um, and I was a very awkward kid, right? Because of all these, emotional stuff and seeking validation. I was just too much all the time, right? So what I needed to be was kind of just shut up and fit in and like figure out how things go and kind of learn through osmosis. No, that's not the way I did it. I showed up and I was like talking to everyone all the time and just trying to be too much. But you just go to school for 4 years. You learn some good stuff, but it's a very, very low speed experience. I did the only like cool thing I got to do really cool while in ROTC was I got the opportunity to go to airborne school as a cadet. And for those who don't know, airborne is like the basic parachutist. You jump out the plane, in your parachute. It's a static line exit. So I got to do that when I was 20. And that was my first taste of like the real army, right? It flew me out to, well, it's now called Fort Moore. It was Fort Benning at the time. Hey, you're at Army Airborne School. Everyone's seen Band of Brothers. It's super romanticized. So like it felt pretty awesome to be there and doing that. That was kind of my first like, hey, I might be a man now. And I got to see like real soldiers, like actual soldiers in the actual army. And then like some of the dudes there, they're like Rangers, and there's all these other guys from all these, elite units who are getting their airborne wings. And I was like, oh crap, all right, I've got some work to do. But I'm really glad I got to do that when I wasn't already commissioned and when I was a cadet, because I was the bottom of the totem pole. And so
Mhm.
I got to really see how like the other half lives, so to speak. Um, and it was that humility piece, right? Like I had to shut up, yes, sergeant, no sergeant, like just, like a private basically. And it was a really good experience for me to kind of see that and have to like embrace that and realize like, hey, you need to work hard, but you also just need to shut up and color sometimes.
You talked earlier how you kind of were the scrawny kid. You kind of weren't
Yeah.
getting. What was the physicality for you? Did you gain confidence over time, those 4 years, or were you still struggling with that confidence and how you were looking or how you were feeling?
Um, I mean, so like I started wrestling in high school and I wasn't a big kid, but I was jacked, man. I wrestled 125 and 130 and I was like 3% body fat, like ridiculously low
Oh.
body fat. I had to get like special approval to even wrestle. Um, so I was like really physically fit. I just wasn't a big guy. By the time I was like 17, 18. College, like I kind of let myself go a little bit, right? I turned 21, started drinking all the time. Like I partied a lot in college. I wasted all kinds of time, all kinds of energy and money doing stuff that like was such a waste of time. If I would have had better people around me to like maybe hold me accountable, I probably would have been a lot better off. So I actually got like pretty weak in college. And so like when I graduated, I only weighed 140 pounds,
Wow.
5'9", 140, like not the image you think of when you think, army officer, right? And I was like, okay, whoa, I've got to grow the heck up. Like I'm about to hit active duty. Like I need to get my life in order here. So I really cut back on like drinking and partying and all that kind of stuff. I started working out like every single day. I was commercial roofing because, very long story short, my orders from when I graduated to like actually going to active duty was like a 7 month gap. So I was like, well, I got to find a way to make money, and no one's going to hire you for only 6 months, right? So commercial roofing will take you because, they take convicted felons. They'll take you too. So backbreaking labor all day, hitting the gym for like 2 hours every single night, just eating everything I could. And I bulked up to almost 170 pounds over that summer. Um, so I was like, all right, I got to get my crap together, but the physical fitness stuff was never really like hard. I think because I had done sports, like I was highly competitive in Taekwondo, I did wrestling, all that kind of stuff. I'd had like my face beat in, quite literally. So like I knew how to like push through pain and all that kind of stuff. I just wasn't like this massive dude. But a lot of those experiences definitely paid off a great deal through any military experience I've had, because like I think it was just normal for me to have to push through adversity. And I think just in general, sports, dads, a lot of times we get this like you get too intense about your kids' sports. The goal of sports isn't for them to be the best. Like if you have a kid who's actually that talented, okay, great, pursue it and try and get scholarships and all that kind of stuff. But let's be honest, like 99% of our kids are probably not going to be that kid. So the reason they need to do sports is to learn exactly what I talked about: pushing through pain, adversity, learning to be teachable and coachable, having to work with teammates. Like those are some of the lessons I learned along the way that not only helped me in sports but in the military.
It's the life skills, I feel like, when it comes to
Absolutely. Yeah.
sports.
So like I'm a huge proponent of any kind of athletics or challenging thing where kids have to like work towards a goal, because it teaches you quite literally the lessons you need for life in a controlled environment where, it's disappointing when you lose, but it's not like the end of the world really, right? So it's a healthy way to learn how to overcome those things.
After those 7 months, you talked about active duty. What was
Mhm.
the challenging part during that time for you?
I was just ready to go. Like I was so tired of like still being at home and having to like, putz around like not in the army yet. Um, I just wanted to get into it, right? And so this was 2011. So, my entire college career in ROTC, I started in 2007. Like that's what they call the surge years, like '07 to '09. Um, that's when they were extending people on deployments for like 15 months and all that kind of stuff. And like I had several classmates who were prior enlisted going through ROTC who had already deployed multiple times. Like one guy was special forces. He literally had a special forces tab, and then he was doing ROTC so he could become an officer. So like I got to learn from some pretty awesome dudes. I was like expecting to just like graduate and immediately go to war, right? Like, I mean, that was the op tempo back then. It was like units were just going, going, going. So I was really tired of being on the sidelines. I've been around it now for like 4.5 years. I want to get into it, but you got to go to your basic course. You got to, pass your initial stuff, all that kind of stuff. Uh, and then you get to the actual army. So I didn't arrive to the 101st Airborne until July, yeah, end of June 2012. And so then that was like, now, hey, I'm in the real army, right? But you're the new guy, you're the FNG. People can Google that if they don't know what that means. Um, and yeah, it was we were getting ready to deploy. So I showed up to a unit that was like 3 months away from going. So it's time to grow up quick. And there was a lot of learning that was done very quickly in that time.
During your active experience, what would be like an accomplishment? Or is there a moment that you're proud of, like a rank that you got, or a
Mm.
moment that you really learned a lot about yourself?
Yeah, some of the proudest moments I have nothing to do with me actually. It's when I was in leadership positions, like as a platoon leader, um, and I got to like help some of my younger soldiers overcome their limits, or give them an opportunity to do something that like everyone dreams about having. And so like one example comes to mind. Um, we were an artillery battalion, right? So I was a gun line platoon leader of howitzer sections, and you can sling load them with helicopters. Like you literally pick them up with like ropes and chains and stuff, and you can move them. And that's one of our mission sets, was to do that rapidly, right? Where you pick them up, move them, and then like be ready to shoot as fast as possible to support, big scale assaults. And we got brand new howitzers, so there was no like standard yet for how to sling load them. So we were literally creating the new SOP for that, the standard operating procedure for how the Army would do it, which was pretty awesome. And so we were testing this, and afterwards the pilots were like, "Hey dudes, we got like tons of time left. Do you guys want to like fly around?" And I looked at my platoon. I was like, "Who's never been on a helicopter?" And virtually everyone raised their hand because they were pretty much all brand new soldiers. And I was like, "Get on the birds!" And they didn't have enough room to fit all the platoon, so like me and some of the senior leaders who had been on helicopters stayed back, and they just flew them around for a while. And then when they came off the helicopters, like it was like kids on Christmas. The grins were ear to ear, and I was like, "Okay, this is awesome." The fact that like we get to just make a couple quick decisions and like give these guys something that cool. So, I have things that I've personally done that I was certainly proud of. But when I reflect back on like my active time, it wasn't necessarily any personal achievement. It's kind of those collective things that we did together. Um, or when I saw someone who like I saw their potential, but they doubted themselves, and I was able to like help inspire them and coach them and train them to overcome that and like become better. And so like even to this day, several of they were privates in my platoon. A lot of them are like sergeants first class now in the Army. They've been very successful. One guy is a first sergeant now, actually. So it's really cool to see them grow. And, I think I talk about leadership a lot. I think that's one of the most rewarding benefits of being a great leader is seeing your people like kind of outperform you.
With what you do currently with coaching, it kind of shows that you had that in you during that time where you're kind of leading a group of people, you're helping
Mm-hmm.
people find their potential, fulfill their potential, and how they can grow into the position. With military, the next part is really sometimes a challenge for those individuals is the transition from military life to civilian life. Some have challenges where they can't transition because it's a different lifestyle. They're so used to certain structure, and some are able to. How was that for you transitioning from military life to civilian life? Did you know what was next? Did you have that game plan, or was it completely the opposite?
I thought I had a great plan. It wasn't very good to kind of to bury the lead. Um, yeah, I was my body hurt for one. Like my back was really hurting. I was getting kind of messed up. And I looked at like what the future held for my family. So I'd just become a father. My daughter was like 3 months old, and we were having a really rough time already. And kind of glossing over a lot of details here, but it was my wife had severe postpartum. I was completely blindsided by that whole experience. And I wasn't a very good husband at all during this time. That's like one of my biggest regrets is looking back at that period. I'm like, man, my wife really needed me. And I was just like this angry, pissed off person acting like she did it to me. She needed her husband and I wasn't that guy. And that like really pains me to say, but that definitely influenced my decision to get out. I mean, I really love the Army. Like, it was a very hard decision to leave. It was like 51% get out, 49% stay in.
Hmm.
Um, I'd done very well, right? I worked really hard. I performed very well. I was evaluated pretty highly compared to like my peers and stuff. So I certainly could have stayed in and been successful. I would have gotten battery command and stuff pretty quick and all that kind of, I would have been able to navigate in the direction I wanted to go. Um, but I worked through like a headhunting firm that, works with officers getting out to place them in corporate America. And it seemed like, hey, this will be great. I'll get a high paying job. We can relocate and like get a big house and all this kind of stuff and put down roots now, because we won't have to move every 3, 4 years. And, so it sounded all great on paper, but, um, yeah, started in corporate America and really what I was too naive to realize what about myself even was I had made the Army my identity. I had no personal identity. Like George did not exist. It was only Captain Hayworth, right? There was no me outside of what I did in my profession. And I think this is a trap a lot of guys fall into because inherently we're designed to like do things, right? Like we want to create and build and cover ground and like whatever it is you're called towards or enjoy doing, like that's a natural thing. Like men make stuff. And the risk is we put all of who we are and our value into that thing. And there has to be a separation. This is what I've learned clearly after the fact. Um, but when I lost that, coupled with all the difficulty I was having at home and all the stress of that and everything, it really put me down a dark spiral. I really was filled with just anger and bitterness and self doubt. And I'm sure at this time, I probably resented my wife a little bit. Like, oh, if you could have just been a better wife, I could have stayed in the army. I had all kinds of just really stupid thoughts going through my head. And during this time too, because we moved away, starting a new life, like I don't really know any of these people that well. Um, I didn't really have anyone in my corner that I could truly be like really transparent with about everything going on with me. And I was kind of just white knuckling life, you know what I mean? Like squeezing it so hard, just trying to maintain control. No one can do it. Like I snapped. And so my experience was not good at all. Um, and then to add on to the chaos of it all, my second day on the job at the company I started working for announced that they were going to spin off my segment of the company and make this huge corporate merger. So I had like 7 different managers in the span of like a year. So it was like Office Space. Like, what is it you say you do here? Like that was my introduction to the business world. It was pretty nuts. So very stressful period of time. But really all that was is it just unveiled who I really was deep down. All of the stuff that I had been like acting through, right? I wore all these masks, right? I wore the mask of the tough guy when I had to be tough, or I wore the mask of being this great husband or whatever. But deep down, I wasn't. I was still this scared, pissed off 16-year-old kid who doubted himself, was full of fear, was addicted to porn, just a terrible inner person, right? And so during this period, uh, I completely spiraled out of control. My wife and I separated. Like I literally told her to just F off. Like I'm done with this. I know what's going to happen here. Leave, go back home to Tennessee. And she did. And I was just so angry. And I didn't surround myself with people who would actually help me. I surrounded myself with people who would enable me. So I was just like partying all the time again. I've got all this extra money that I never had before, working for corporate America and just blowing it on, booze and stuff. And I got so jaded and so like self-deluded. I got to a point where I was talking to other women, and then I was doing more than talking to other women and having affairs. And um it's a really long story. I'm trying to compress it to fit in here, but the long story short there is I had all this stuff I'd never dealt with. I'd never been honest with myself about. And so I was, for something has to give. And so I destroyed myself with sexual things, right? But a lot of people will use alcohol or drugs or any of that kind of stuff. There's a million ways in which people you know outlet their stupidity if
Yeah.
you want to call it that. And so I got to this point where I was just disgusted with myself because I did not believe it was okay. Like I knew what I was doing was wrong. I was like, well, I'm going to get mine anyway. And I didn't even know who I was anymore. Like I looked at myself and was just like, what are you? Like what have you become? And um basically in desperation I reached out to uh my wife and I had been seeing a marriage counselor. She was really good. And we had already done like an intensive therapy thing together for a week. But, I told her what was going on. I was like, I got to be honest. Like, I'm not helping the situation. And she was like, you need to go back to that place, just you. And so that was the first time in my life that week where I was with all these other people. You spend a whole week with your group and you guys like, you unveil everything about each other. You like role play all your traumas and everything. And like other people will act as members in your life that you like have to work stuff out with. It's like really intense. And while I was there, that was the first time that I had honestly admitted to other human beings all of the things that I had done and how much I hated myself and how I didn't even know where to begin. And I was certain, right? I've been wearing all these masks to try and impress everyone. And it was the first time in my life that I put them all down. And I was certain, because the story in my head was if they only knew the real me, they would reject me, right? They would hate me. They would think I'm pathetic. And the exact opposite happened. I deserved rejection. I deserved judgment. And instead, I got grace and understanding from all the people in my group. And they connected with me with my pain. and they realize like you've done bad things because you're a hurt person, you know? And so that was a really like pivotal moment for me to realize like, okay, honesty is the only way forward. There is, because I'd been living a double life. I mean, it was just unmanageable. The stress would kill me, you know? And then pile on all the guilt and shame, right? So from that point forward, you know, my wife and I had started to try and reconcile things, but she didn't know this was going on. Um, so yeah, I had to admit to her everything. Um, and that was hands down the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, was to tell my wife that I had been unfaithful and ask her to give me a chance to reconcile. But that if she didn't want to, I would understand, because you have to hold it in an open hand and just hope that they want to continue to work. So I know that was a lot, but for me, getting out of the army and like becoming a brand new father, that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. George couldn't keep the act up anymore, and he became the worst version of himself because I was isolated. I'd lost my identity, or so I thought. Um, and you know, I placed all my faith in what I did, not who I need to be, and my creator. So yeah, I really spiraled down after that period.
Was your wife shocked about you sharing all that information? Did she kind of maybe have thought of what was going on? Did she know things that, I mean, like some people know that their significant other probably has an idea of what's
Yeah.
happening, but until they actually admit they are not knowing the full story. What was that
Yeah.
like for her?
I mean, I had indiscretions like online that she had seen. I don't think she knew that I'd ever like taken it all the way with anyone. So yeah, I think she was pretty caught off guard. I mean, she was really wounded, rightfully so. I mean, it felt horrible to have to tell her that because I knew it would crush her, you know? And like, you've already hurt her so much and now you have to basically hurt her again. That was like the worst experience of my life. I was having to do that to her. Um, but it's necessary if you're going to both heal from it. Um, so yeah, I mean, obviously, and this is just like, this is a thing, guys, any marriage that's had this type of issue where you're trying to reconcile, you don't just like tell them every gory detail right up front, right? You got to like work up to that. You definitely need a therapist involved to like help you stay on track with this. But um, you know, I had to basically, she was hurt and angry, rightfully so, and you have to basically just take it on the chin, right? Whatever you get back is kind of what you've earned anyway, and you kind of have to just accept it and take the blows, you know, whatever they say, you got to just absorb that for a while, um, because you have to earn back trust, you know. And over time, you know, her anger subsided, her hurt subsided, um, and it definitely wasn't like a straight line. It's not like I just magically became a better dude overnight, but we really worked through a lot together. And then I went to this place called Mighty Oaks because I was still really struggling even after doing all this therapy. I think the year is now 2017, maybe 18. I got out of the army in 2016. I think it was 2018 is when a guy I had met from that other place called Onsite, he was a Marine veteran, and he was like, "Hey, dude, I found another place that's like the real deal for vets. Like, you need to go to this thing." And I was like, "Okay, just tell me where to sign, you know?" And so it's called Mighty Oaks Warrior Foundation. It was founded by Chad Robichaux, and I went there again, still really desperate, right? Like, dude, my life is so unmanageable. I don't even know what to do. And again, I got that experience, but it was a little bit different because this whole group, like, these were warriors. Like, a lot of these dudes were some pretty hardcore bros, right? Like, who'd done some way harder stuff than I'd ever done in the military. Um, just like laying it all out there in these small groups. And I was like, whoa, okay, time to put down the act for real, dude. Like, if that guy can, you certainly can, you know, like he's got way worse problems than you do, type of thing. And that perspective was really helpful. Um, and they also didn't just like tap dance around you being not a good person. Like, I was trying to like make excuses for myself, and my group leader literally interrupted me and was like, "That's BS. Don't you ever make that excuse again." And I was like, "Whoa, okay, and I needed that. I needed someone to be firm with me. Um, but that was a really magical experience for me because what they do there is incredible work. So, if anyone's looking for something to donate to, I highly recommend you look into Mighty Oaks. I mean, they are really changing people's lives. So I went for me, and they have a women's program too, and my wife went for her. And that really was kind of the catalyst for us both to really start working through our crap for real. So again, it was a long process, but um, here we are. We've been married over 10 and a half years now. Um, and I'm sure a lot of people will be like, oh, well, you're just like barely scooting by. I was like, no, dude, we're like on fire. I mean, and I'll get to like how that happens, but there's a lie that like marriage is this thing you just tolerate. And the best it's ever going to be is just like, oh, just barely scraping by. That's not the truth. Like real people who really work on their marriages and really put investment of energy and care into it can have the most amazing experiences together because true intimacy is far more than just the physical acts. It's that real trust that's built when you know each other to the core. You know all your dirty secrets and you love each other anyway. And I'll kind of pause here and let you we can like unpack how men can create that situation for themselves, but um I learned a lot through this experience. And so I hate that I did the things I did. Um, but there's like two takeaways from it. One is I've been given the greatest gift of grace that I will probably ever receive uh, from another human being. I mean, my wife is an incredible woman who gave me another chance, uh, more than another chance, a lot of chances to reconcile. And so I'm forever grateful for her to her for those experiences and for that chance. And the other takeaway is I know how to help people now, right? Like I'm not the only dude who lost his identity or made stupid mistakes or damaged his marriage. And so I realized like, hey, all the things that I needed to fix me, I could have figured out a lot faster if I would have had like better people teaching me how to do it earlier or surrounded myself with those types of people. And so that's kind of the other takeaway from this. I can turn all of that pain into goodness. And one of my mentors says this all the time is like, you can either transform your pain or your trauma or transmit it. So my mission in life is to transform all that pain and turn it into healing for other people.
You kind of talked about it, where you guys stand today.
Mm-hmm.
What has been that relationship like where you are currently? And you kind of talked about in your earlier story about the way that your parents went through their relationship and how you as a kid almost played a big part because you were being told a lot of information. When
Mm-hmm.
you look at your child now, are you trying not to copy that where they may hear things over time as they're getting older, but where you guys are as a couple, you want that to be shown, the positives, the growth from your guys' relationship?
Yeah, completely. So, this has kind of become a rallying cry for me and my wife is so we both come from broken homes, right? And her backstory is way worse than mine, actually. I mean, she's been through some serious stuff. But that's her story to tell. I'm not going to go out of respect to her. I'm not going to unveil those details. But, to say that we both didn't have good examples of what a healthy relationship should look like is kind of an understatement. So it's no surprise that we really struggled. However, and this is where I challenge men is it's not someone else's fault. It's your responsibility to work on that, right? You're an adult now. You chose to marry your wife. It's your responsibility. So with that, we've both done a ton of work together and individually to grow. But our legacy is healing generational trauma, is breaking those curses. Like our daughter, man, I get emotional every time I talk about this. Our daughter will never know what we knew. She will never have that experience, not even remotely close to it. And that is, I think, one of the greatest gifts that any parent can give their kids. And I think it's where men need to step the heck up, is because like I see so much victimhood and so much blaming. And sure, these things happen to me, but I still did the things I did. And me trying to blame someone else doesn't get me out of that situation. It was the minute that I stopped making excuses for myself and realized that, okay, maybe I am actually the problem, or maybe my wife still has problems that she needs to fix. But if I just grow up and be more of a man, she has no choice but to follow me now. So we can get it. That's like a lot of different questions you asked there, but that is one key point there is our legacy is completely changing it. And so we're not just going to talk about it, we're showing it. The way that we interact together is a completely different experience than what I had, and I know what my wife had. And I tell this to men a lot too, right? If you're a husband with kids, your number one responsibility is your marriage. It's not the kids. The kids are below the marriage. And the reason is this: one, kids naturally understand the minute they're born, when they can understand dynamics of anything, that they should have mom and dad, that mom and dad should really love each other. And that is their whole world. Their whole identity in life for almost 18 years is that relationship. They look to it for strength and security. And so you need to have a very strong marriage. And two, it models for them how to have healthy relationships. They want to know that they are under a set of leadership, right? They don't want to be the parents, they want to be the kids. And so your relationship needs to maintain that dynamic. And so I even go as far as saying, like, when my daughter talks disrespectfully to my wife, I say, do not talk to my wife that way. Or if she's like, my wife asks her to do something and she's not doing it, I don't say, mom told you to do it, go do it. I say, hey, did my wife ask you to do that? You need to go do it. Because I'm directing back to the point that we come first, the marriage, and then our daughter is underneath that structure. And the final point on why you need to make your marriage number one, not the kids, is if you make the kids number one, what happens when they grow up and now they leave the home? We've all heard of like empty nesters getting divorced. The reason is because you didn't have a relationship. You stayed together for the kids. And that's just as damaging as when you divorce earlier, because now they're adult kids and they realize it was all a lie. And now they're having their relationships and they're going to have trouble too. It's not, they're not immune to the effects just because they're adult kids now. You're still their parents and they're still going to see that dynamic. So living it in real time is the most effective thing you can do for your kids, because it builds security, it models healthy relationships, and it sets them up to succeed in their own relationships in the future.
You currently are doing two different business and ventures with coaching, but also as a podcast host.
Mm-hmm.
What's your mission for both? They might have two different mission statements, but what are those mission statements for both?
Yeah, so the podcast actually came first, and it's me and three really close friends. We were really tired of like the direction of our country, and we're like, well, we need to do something about it. What can we do? Well, we have limited resources and time. Let's start a podcast to try and be a resource for men to be better fathers. So we called it the Present Fathers Podcast because it's kind of a double meaning there with like, hey, we're going to tackle present issues, but it's also about being present. Your presence needs to be felt by your family. So the mission there is literally just to equip men to be better fathers, because in the long run, that will make a generational impact that's positive as opposed to what we've been getting in our culture. Um, and what I realized too over time was in my own personal journey, um, that I'm not the only guy who struggled like I've struggled. Um, my story is probably all too common, unfortunately. And the fastest way to fix our country, fix families, whatever, is by fixing men and teaching men the right ways first. And this is the reason men are built for leadership. And so, in my own experience, in my marriage, it's not that like my wife can't do anything without me, but when I lead and bear the weight of leadership, the responsibility of it, and I don't pass the blame to her, she's able to flourish as wife and mother because she's not being oppressed by everything that I should have been doing in the first place. And when you lead with love and compassion, you create a protective barrier for your family, and they want to follow you, right? So I'm really glossing over a lot, but this is what my program is built on: is men are natural born leaders. You have to train yourself to do it. You have to accept that mantle and fill the role. And most of us are scared of it for a lot of reasons, because society tells you you're toxic. If you dare try to be a leader, well, shut up and go color and be a good boy, and we don't need you, right? All you're good for is to put food on the table. Like, there's all these negative cultural influences, right? But there's also just as much to blame on men themselves. We're all looking for someone else to blame or some savior to come in. Men, you are the problem. Like, you have the power to actually change your situation. If you're married, you don't like the way it is, that's exactly what you've earned. I had to swallow that pill too. It sucked. But when I did and realized, like, okay, maybe I am the problem or I'm a lot of the problem, but that means I also have the power to change the situation. I don't need some savior. I don't need someone to come in and rescue me. I can actually make the change myself. And that should actually inspire you, because that means you can start learning these things like I learned, or work with me or work with someone else to accelerate that process for you. And you can radically transform your life in a matter of 3, 6, 12 months. It's not like this lifelong journey and then maybe you'll make it. It's like, no, I've watched it happen over and over and over. When men start doing what they were born to do, leading and loving their families the right ways, and bearing responsibility the right ways, and having authority in the right ways, it transforms your life and your family's life. Um, I like to say men today are salty. They're stressed, angry, lonely, tired, and they're yearning for more. And the main reason is exactly that. You're a hammer looking for nails, but all you're hitting is trees and rocks, and you're not actually doing what you were intended to do. You're not filling your purpose. So of course you feel angry and stressed and conflicted and lack of identity and all these things, because you're just taking orders from everyone else. You have zero authority. You're the family butler, not the family captain. Like, no wonder men feel so crappy. And it's a big problem that needs to be fixed, because generationally it's going to screw up our society even more. Men today commit suicide 3 to 4 times more often than women. So this isn't like some little issue of like, oh, well, that guy's just a weak man. No, dudes, men are so isolated. We're so cut off from each other. It's literally killing us. Isolation is the number one destroyer of men, because it shatters your confidence. It shatters your ability to learn. It shatters your ability to protect yourself from negative thoughts. So brotherhood is that antidote that gets men out of those positions of feeling salty, and where their wife doesn't respect them, or their kids are always talking back to them, or no one around them has any respect for them either. It's because it's not that you're a bad person. It's because you probably weren't taught correctly. Most of us come from broken homes. We didn't have our parents around like we were supposed to. We didn't have dads that taught us these things correctly. So we have to fix it. It's on us to change the direction of our society with our own families first. And then when you've got that in order, you can then help more people outwardly. And so that's why I get so fired up about this, because if you start with the men and you start fixing that, by extension, they're going to remove a lot of the problems off the table, because they're just cutting it out on their own before it ever becomes a problem. And so you asked about like, what's the state of our marriage now? If there's even a hint of something that's off, I'm addressing it immediately. Like, I don't tap dance around it and be like, well, I hope my wife doesn't get upset if I say this. It's like, hey, babe, this thing happened. Are you upset about that? Yeah, I am. Okay, well, let's have the discussion right now. And that's built through trust. That's built through me earning her respect as the leader of her household, not because I'm some special guy, but because I started actually doing the right things. And when you get to that point, you can actually protect your marriage really, really well, because every little thing is just knocked off the table right away, and you don't have these massive issues hanging over you anymore. But we were taught the exact opposite. Don't make your wife mad. Don't you dare tell her that she's wrong. Don't you dare hold a boundary with your wife. That'll make her upset. Happy wife, happy life, right? That way of thinking has destroyed more marriages than potentially anything else in our modern society. And it has to stop. You have to start respecting yourself first, men, believing that you can change your situation and starting to take action on it. And then everyone else will start to see the proof, and then they will follow. You don't get to just put your foot down and say, well, I'm your husband, so you have to respect me. Okay, big guy, you're not proving it with action, right? So that's what I'm doing now. It took me a long time to figure this out. I've compressed that into 90 days. Like, I can teach you everything you need to know in 90 days. Maybe you'll still have some bigger issues we need to work on together. But after 90 days, like, you will be so drastically different and be like, dude, some of this is so obvious. And it'll be like, yeah, I had the same aha moments, right? I know all about leadership. I'm an Army officer. I've commanded units up to 300 people, right? And I applied absolutely none of that in my own home. I was too terrified of my 5'2", 100-pound wife to actually lead. And that's the insanity that we're living in today. And when you refuse to accept that anymore and actually start taking action, it turns around pretty quick, because your wife wants a leader. She wants her husband to step up to the plate. But you haven't been for so long. Now she's had to be both wife and husband. And so she's burnt out. She doesn't want to have sex with you. She's tired and exhausted. And then you're pissed off all the time too. You can change that through action.
When you're not working, Our listeners like to learn even more about our guests. What do you like to do for fun? What is something that you enjoy that people do not know you like?
Uh, Something that most people don't know. Like, well, I play guitar. Here, I'll see if I can turn the camera real quick. Can you see that?
Okay.
Yeah, so I play guitar. That was something that's been around in my life a lot. Um, I'm at the point in my life where I'm working a lot with this, building this business, and to me, it's a mission. It's so much more than just a business, right? Like I really believe in what I'm doing. I believe I'm called to this. Um, and I get really fired up helping other people, right? Like you talked about it earlier. It seems like you always had those kind of coaching traits about you. That's always been really fulfilling for me. So like I don't really feel like I'm working as much as I used to, if that makes sense. I love doing podcasts. I think this is super fun. So when I'm not doing work things, I'm pretty much just unplugged, man. Like we don't do a whole lot anymore that's like crazy. I like football and all that kind of stuff, but I've really cut back on a lot of that stuff, not because I think it's bad. I just don't care like I used to. I've got like bigger things I'm actually doing. So when I'm done with these types of things, I just like to unplug, put the phone away, try and spend real quality time with my family. We like to make little trips as much as possible. I think that's kind of like my favorite thing to do is we take bigger vacations and stuff, but we'll take like these 2 to 3 day little getaways, something we can drive to and use some hotel points just to get a cheap hotel for the night type of thing. And those have been some of the best memories for me as well as for our daughter. Um, and I think we're still at that phase. My daughter's about to turn 9. So like this is the time to do that kind of stuff, right? Like when she gets a little bit older and she's out with her friends all the time or whatever, I'll probably get back to doing some other hobby more often. But um yeah, I mean that may be kind of a lame answer, but that's like the other example I want to set for guys is who cares? I don't care if you think I'm weird because look at my life and look at what most people live like. The average American guy today is fat, stressed out, drinking too much. He's not physically fit. He hates the status of his life. I love my life. And it's not because I'm some exceptional dude. I don't make massive amounts of money or any of that kind of stuff. I have fulfillment and contentment because I've actually fostered it through what I'm doing. And so those littler moments that may seem lame to like society are the most treasured moments that I get because they've been heavily worked for. These relationships between my wife and my daughter have been cultivated with the utmost intention and effort. And so the rewards that I get from that, the harvest of those efforts is far greater than any little thing I'm going to go do. If that makes sense. I know it's kind of a strange answer to that question, but I also work out a lot. I love physical fitness. I think every man should work out, not necessarily to look great, but the discipline of having to push through adversity, stay consistent, it pays a lot of benefits in other areas of your life as well.
Well, I want to go back to what you mentioned about who cares. And the
Yeah.
reason I asked that question is every guest you can listen to on my show, they always have different answers, but it shows that everyone has their unique things that
Hmm.
they enjoy, the things that are special in their lives. You talked about those small trips, and people can compare that to other guests I've had that enjoy like going hiking. They like those
Yeah.
small camping trips. It's something that is valuable to them. And you talk about
Right.
it's important to make those memories as your daughter's getting older. When she looks back at those times, she's going to remember those fun times, not
Hmm.
you being on your phone all the time or being at
Yeah.
work. Those small trips are going to be something that she might do with her family when she gets older. So I love asking those questions because it makes our listeners learn even more about the guests. It kind of takes those items and kind of, okay, I can connect it to their story on why they enjoy that or
Yeah.
why that means so much to them to do it now at this point in their life.
Yeah. And like this is an element I train in my program is I literally have a section on be weird, be the weird one in the room. I think it's
Yep.
in our fitness and diet section. Um, because most people they'll be like, "What? You're not going to have the cake and ice cream?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm good." What do you mean you're good? It's like, no, I'm okay. I don't need that. I'm fine. And they look at you like you're crazy. Like, it's crazy that we think it's normal to pound that stuff all the time. You know what I mean? So like, I'm fine being weird now because weird means I'm fit. I have a strong marriage. My daughter loves me. We have great relationships and I don't need all the money in the world. I have everything I need right now, So I'm fine being weird. And like, guys are almost waiting for permission. I feel like they need permission to go be better men. You don't need permission from anyone, guys. If you need a sign, here it is. Like, take charge of those things. I promise the effort will be worth it. Like, all these other pursuits about which football team's going to win, or, who's going to be the president or whatever, like, it's all distractions. Like, if you really take that stuff away, nothing changes for your life. Who cares? Like, it's not actually going to affect you. What will affect you is what you do with your life and what you do with your family, if you're a family man, and the intentionality you have in that time. Because, like, to your point, I know my daughter's going to grow up. She's going to move out. She's going to marry a man, start a family. Like, my life is going to change. So in this season of life, my focus is on those core memories, those special times, to teach her, to build those memories together that will be treasured forever, and to date my wife in front of her so that she knows what to expect in a man. And then when that phase comes, my wife and I don't know, maybe we'll travel all the time, or maybe we'll take up pickleball or something. Who knows, right? But that'll be a new season of life, and we'll take it when it comes. That's the joy. That's the fun of working for a strong marriage, is you get to just take it as it comes, and you start new adventures together.
Well, pickleballs now. By that time, there's going to be a new sport that's probably going to come out that's going to take away.
I do like it. We just don't have a facility near us that really does it. So
the final question I'll ask you, for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
I think the most important thing, whether you're a man or woman listening to this, is to surround yourself with other people. So I say brotherhood a lot because I work with men specifically, but having a tight-knit community of people that are better than you. Like, I don't hang out with anyone who's worse than me now. I just don't. Not because I'm like a mean person or whatever. It's just naturally, by me trying to be this better man, I have gravitated towards people who are way better than me. And I'm learning everything I can from them. I ask them hard questions. They give me great answers. Like, I thrive off of this community I've built for myself. Like, I have people who are truly in my corner no matter what. Like, I could call up my buddy Brandon, my co-host on my podcast right now, about anything in the world. He would drop what he's doing and listen to me, and help me. He would actually give me like sound advice and wisdom. And most people don't have that. So you're not going to be great on your own. No one amazing becomes amazing by themselves. They had an army of people behind them, around them, helping them, coaching them, training them, assisting them. No one gets to be exceptional without that. And I've seen this play out not just in my own life, but like these mentors that I have. I mean, some of these people that I get to speak to are incredible human beings. Like, everyone tries to get in the room with them, I'm very fortunate. And they all have this. They are surrounded by even better people. Like, they have all these circles that are just powerful communities that propel them forward. So you have to do all the things, right? Like anyone, you got to work hard. You have to have discipline. You got to fight through adversity. You still have to be a good person yourself, but it sure is a lot easier when you're surrounded by a lot of other better people too. So if you're listening to that and you're like, "Ooh, I don't have a circle," go find one. It's not as hard as you think. You can find it online. There's probably listeners to this podcast who might want to connect with you. You can join an online forum. You can find something in town. Like, go sign up for an event, meet a person there and be like, "Hey, I like you. Can we hang out again next week?" "Yeah, I'd love to." Just like, be bold. And if you do that and you start trying to be a better person and strive towards, success, whatever that means to you, people are naturally going to see that, and they're going to gravitate towards you and want to help you anyway. So it's kind of this weird dynamic. You have to start on the path first, and then the mentors will show themselves to you. And I've certainly seen that play out in my life. I know a lot of really powerful people who have said the same thing to me. So I'm a big proponent of, you need a team.
George, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we are excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Thank you, bro. I appreciate the opportunity, and just get out there, everyone, and rise to that challenge.
Tune in next time to hear my next guest talk about their rise to the challenge. Remember to follow, subscribe on all major audio platforms. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get full length episode in video format. What path do you take to accomplish your goals? You decide.